Seafood, an important part to a healthy diet. Treasured by many, some dishes are considered a delicacy. But the price of some of these species can get quite expensive. It is very important for consumers to spend wisely, but for anyone purchasing at fish markets or street vendors, can one be certain they know what they're buying? The harsh reality is seafood fraud has always been a major problem.
I think that in any industry, when there's money to be made from fraud, there's a risk of fraud occurring.
Most can recognize species if it is visible in its entirety, but to the average consumer, a filleted fish can be rather difficult to identify.
It's a pervasive problem, it's widespread, and the status quo is not doing enough to stop seafood fraud and to protect consumers, fishermen, our oceans.
Is there a solution to help combat this problem? In a laboratory located in the Sunshine State, there are two individuals that may have the answer. Founded in 2001, Oceana is an international organization focused on ocean conservation. The group was one of the first to recognize seafood fraud as a problem and conducted studies to verify these issues. Leading the charge is their senior campaign director, Beth Lowell.
We launched our campaign on stopping seafood fraud in 2011. Oceana's tested seafood. We've gone to grocery stores, restaurants, and sushi bars, purchased fish, crab, salmon, and shrimp, and tested to see what it was. So we went to 24 states and 25 major metropolitan areas looking to find seafood fraud. And overall, about a third of the seafood that we tested was mislabeled, where one fish was sold as another. So what we found was, one, seafood mislabeling is still happening, and the problem is that there's not a system in place that tracks seafood from the fishing boat to the dinner plate. There's not a lot of transparency in the supply chain, so it's been pervasive and we've keep finding it.
There's been increased attention on this issue, but I don't know that many people realized it was this prevalent.
One of the biggest retail chains in the country, Whole Foods Market, has joined the fight against seafood fraud. Carrie Brownstein is responsible for their global seafood quality standards.
Specifically in the seafood industry, the supply chains can be long and fish can change hands many times. So by the time a restaurant or a market gets fish in the conventional market, they may have lost track of where it came from originally. From a cost perspective, it's critical. We want to know that the seafood that we're buying is actually what we think it is. We don't want to rip people off. People don't want to be ripped off, right? They want to know that what they're buying is what they think they're buying.
Well, stopping seafood fraud is really important because not only does it rip off consumers, often it's a lower value fish is sold as a higher priced fish, but it can impact health and also hurts honest fishermen and seafood businesses that play by the rule, that are undercut by people that are pirate fishing or selling fish as a different fish than what it really is.
In Clearwater Beach, Florida, Michael Preston has become a success story. Better known as Frenchy, he opened his first restaurant in 1981 and now has multiple locations in the area. He has seen seafood fraud as a problem for years.
What really bothers me is the restaurants that are charging in the $20 range for like a grouper dinner and, getting a full price for something that, you should be getting the real product. That bothers me. And usually the customer should know, just like in life, if it's too cheap, it's probably not real.
Grouper's not cheap, it's expensive. What you pay for a grouper dinner here at this restaurant or any of our restaurants, if you were to get that in Chicago, Boston, New York, you'd be paying a lot more for it. So cost always runs into people's decisions. Unfortunately, cutting corners that way only ruins your credibility.
So it's a question of the integrity of the market and not ripping people off, right? And it's also a health issue, and it's also a conservation issue. We have major obstacles to conservation and fisheries management if products are mislabeled. We have certain species that are abundant and others that are not. And if you are unable to know what you are selling, it's really difficult to conserve these species.
Unfortunately, if you buy something that you think it's wild-caught shrimp and it's actually farmed, you could be subjecting yourself to some of the health impacts or supporting unsustainable fishing. Farm shrimp can have residues on it from pesticides to antibiotics, farmed in places that don't have the same requirements as U.S. shrimp farms have. Or also you want to support a local economy. You want to support wild-caught U.S. shrimp that have to be fished under certain regulations that we have in the United States.
Studies from Oceana and others showed that a large percentage of the white tuna sold in sushi markets wasn't tuna at all, but escolar. At Whole Foods Market, we won't even sell escolar because it can cause digestive problems for people. So, you know, there are health implications to eating something that is not what you think it is.
At the end of the day, the burden should not be on a consumer to walk into a supermarket, pick up a package of fish and say, was this legally caught? Is this the fish in this package that the label says? They shouldn't have to be the ones that have to trace back and figure out where a fish came from. We should be encouraging people to eat seafood and make it easier for them to eat seafood, and traceability is one way to do that.
With seafood fraud being such a huge problem, what can be done? Will traceability and accountability become the solution? Or will scientific evidence be the deciding factor? Michael Preston, more commonly known as Frenchy, opened his first restaurant in Clearwater Beach 35 years ago and has since expanded his empire. He realized a while ago that the best way to fight seafood fraud is to do it yourself by taking matters into his own hands.
You hear farm to the table, well, we're seated at the table. Having bought a commercial fishing boat, they gave us access to that, being able to know the product from the time it's caught to the time we put it on the table.
Along with his restaurants, Frenchy opened Frenchy Seafood Company, his own distribution center. It is here where Tommy Shook oversees all the fish that come off the boats.
We currently go through about 200,000 pounds of fillets a year, about 190,000 to be exact, which translates into about 500,000 pounds of grouper a year. At the end of the year, I can account for every pound of fish that we've used. I can tell you what boat it came off of, when we unloaded it, where it went from there, and on and on. These guys will be grouper sandwiches this afternoon.
The process involves, they bring the fish back. Our seafood company buys them at a fair market price from the fishermen. We process them, removing the skin, the bones, and so on and so forth. And the fillets itself are then shipped to the restaurants. From there, we cut them in sandwich portions, dinner portions, grouper nuggets, and taco portions. We cook them, send them out, and could be the fish you're eating today was caught yesterday. So it don't get any fresher than that.
We know the product from the time it's caught to the time it's cooked, and we handle it all the way through. You can't beat that situation. That's the best scenario for everybody. Best scenario for us because we know what we're serving. Best scenario for the customer because they're getting the best.
Frenchy has a system and it works. But what about those who don't have access to a fleet of boats? How can the average consumer or wholesaler know what they're purchasing? In South Florida, 2 individuals have come up with an invention that may change the landscape.
I took on the charge to restore consumer confidence in what people buy, that they know what they're getting, they know what they're eating, they deserve to know what they're eating.
Pure Molecular is a University of South Florida spin-off company formed in 2014 for the primary purpose of providing and developing portable genetic identification technologies to combat seafood mislabeling fraud. So the first part of the procedure is to sample a very small piece of fish tissue. We do this using a sterile biopsy punch. Take this small piece of fish tissue and drop it into our specialized lysis buffer. Now what this buffer does is it breaks open the cells of the fish tissue and releases the nucleic acid into the buffer so it can be interrogated by the grouper check assay itself. This sits for about 5 minutes. Then once that occurs, you take your grouper check pack here that has all of your reaction tubes in them containing the specific oligonucleotides for grouper species and grouper species alone. Using a very small micropipette, you transfer a little bit of that lysate to however many reaction tubes you want to use, depending on how many fish you're testing or what species of fish you're testing. Then you place the reaction tubes into the amplifier reader. You then use specialized optical codes that are specific for each assay step. So then you scan the product code, it loads the information directly into the amplifier, and basically you're just ready to go here. And within 15 to 45 minutes, you'll know whether this grouper or this sample of fish is grouper species or not. What it does is it very specifically detects genetic material from a multitude of organisms.
And what it looks for is it looks for the production of a fluorescent product, which indicates that the gene that we're looking for is present. And if there's no increase in fluorescence, that means the gene is absent.
This sample right here on the screen was positive for grouper. That's demonstrated by the increase in fluorescence over time. It started increasing about 20-25 minutes. This is a positive sample indicated by the positive sign on the left-hand side for each sample. Inversely, this is a sample that came up as non-grouper. You can see here the fluorescence line did not increase at all over time. This is an imposter fish.
From our data and the extensive testing that we've done both academically and in the private sector, this technology has worked very, very well.
It's been amazing the amount of press we've gotten just on the concept. We have about 50 different media outlets, including newspapers and TV stations and radio interviews.
Grouper Check received high praise and great reviews, but needed financial backing. Enter Joni James of the St. Petersburg Downtown Partnership.
In some ways, we're just like any other equity investor they're trying to attract for venture capital. Pure Molecular, the company that owns Grouper Check, came to us. John Paul gave a presentation along with Bob Ulrich. The Tech Fund Committee makes a recommendation. This time it went to the board, and the board approved the investment. This device puts into a layperson's hand the ability to be that scientific assistant. And the portability factor, the quick read factor, all of that was impressive to us.
I have heard of Grouper's Check, and I think it's a great tool, and I like to see innovation in this landscape of seafood traceability and rapid identification of fish. Although these technologies are great, they won't on their own solve seafood fraud. I think it still needs to be paired with traceability. In fact, we just recently released a report where we featured 15 businesses from fishermen through distribution to retail and restaurants that use traceability because it works and it builds value for their business.
Traceability is important to Whole Foods Market because we understand that when customers come into our stores, they just want to buy healthy and delicious seafood. We do the homework for them. We ensure that the fisheries and the farms that we source seafood from meet our standards, and we can track the products through the supply chain. And we don't ask customers to have to do a lot of homework in order to figure out what to have for dinner.
For Oceana, we want to ensure that all seafood sold in the U.S. is safe and it's legally caught and it's honestly labeled. And fighting seafood fraud is one of these ways, including increasing transparency and traceability in the supply chain.
From organizations to retailers, these individuals have taken the necessary steps to help eliminate the mislabeling of fish. And in 2014, the U.S. government established a task force and have since established an action plan to combat seafood fraud. But will this be enough to finally end this ongoing problem?
We think it's a good step forward, but we would like to see more that all seafood is tracked not only to the border, but from boat all the way to the dinner plate.